we arrive at the point where 37 words changed your life.
A reminder that Christians should not support or attend LGBTQ Pride Month events held in June. They promote a culture and encourage activities that are contrary to the Christian faith and morals. They're especially harmful for children.
I can see why it might be controversial to the world slightly.
But then comes a point when they became less happy with me. A few hours later, I had a letter telling me that I was to be disciplined for bringing the school into disrepute, and it got quite interesting after that.
Hello and welcome to Together, the podcast. My name's Ian Young and I'm your host today, and I'm joined by a very special guest, Keith Waters. Keith, welcome to the show. We're here today to discuss a difficult subject, a subject that involves freedom of speech, and that a tweet might change someone's life is quite interesting to me. So, Keith, before we get into what happened to you and the following process and outcomes, we always say here on the podcast it's really good to get to know somebody before you listen to whether they're a good person. Should we listen to them? Do they love God?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I'd really like to know, what's your testimony? Have you always been a Christian? Have you always known God? Did you grow up in a Christian family? So if you could just tell us, how did you come to meet God and when did you give your life to Christ?
Yeah, well, I'll try and give you the potted version.
Yeah, I was born.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, they say that. I don't remember it, but yeah. So I was brought up in a family who were not Christians. My parents would have occasionally gone to the local Methodist church, very occasionally. Got a brother and a sister. My sister went to the Baptist church. My brother went to the Anglican church in the village, and I went to the Methodist church, Sunday school. Now, I don't know whether there was a kind of plan here or whether it's just kind of good babysitting. I'm sure it wasn't that. But, that's what happened.
Could have been.
Yeah, so I was, I would trundle along on a Sunday morning, and I was a bit of a pain in the neck. I've improved slightly since then, but not a lot. But the thing is, half wanted to be there, half didn't. And, the little old ladies smelling of mothballs doing the Sunday school, they were great. But, they're little old ladies, and did I want to be amongst them? But they were so gracious and generous and clearly loving, because whilst I didn't want to be there, I did want to be there. I wasn't interested in Christianity, wasn't interested in church, but, you got biscuits, and that was good. So I went along for most of my childhood, and I guess probably around about the kind of age I was 10 or 11, a boys' brigade was started up. This was a village outside Cambridge, and there were two or three in the area. Boys' brigade started up, so I got involved in that. Again, it was good fun. All this God stuff, though, you don't want to bother with that, it's boring. And I wouldn't have thought I was actually learning much about God, although, interestingly, many years later, I realised I was learning an awful lot, because the things that come back to you that you did learn, didn't realise. Great. So, I got involved in Boys' Brigade, carried on, became an apprentice electrician when I left school, kind of foul-mouthed apprentice, wandering around the place, around the church as well, being quite foul-mouthed as well at times, I think. But again, very gracious people. I then met my wife-to-be, who is very much Christian. And just happened to meet through mutual friends. There is a longer version, which actually I won't go through, but actually I first met her, I think, when she was about 2 or 3. But that's another issue. We haven't got time for that. But because of her, I was interested in her, but she, and bizarrely, she was interested in me, but there's no way that she was going to be going out with, let alone marrying somebody who wasn't a Christian. And she very kindly made that clear. But, the people within the church were clearly praying for me. My mother-in-law, to-be, was a good influence as well. She'd be quite straight-talking, have conversations, just small conversations, but, things here or there. And through the witness of that, and going along with my wife, Joanna, to her church, and hearing probably the same gospel message, but in a very different style, I eventually and I can relate to C.S. Lewis here. I kind of gave in to God. It's one of those, I grudgingly gave in to grace. I don't know how you do that, but he is so gracious. And in my late teens, early 20s, became a Christian, gave my life to Christ, and we were married a couple of years later.
What did that look like for you to give your life to Christ? Was there like a altar call, or was
that's the interesting thing.
Right.
And this is people often talk about this kind of great moment. Well, I didn't have a great moment, maybe because it was my grudgingness.
Yeah.
But I knew that Jesus, was who Jesus said he was,
right,
and who he is. I knew that, but that's no good to anybody, is it? It's like having a cheque and putting it on the fridge. If you don't cash it, it's there. It's £1 million. But so I knew that. But eventually, I kind of got to the point of, well, what do I do about this? I'm kind of mongrel Christian at this stage. I've had all sorts of influences and not really taken any notice of any kind of denominational stuff going on. Joanna was brought up in an evangelical Anglican church, so there was that kind of stuff. So I knew very little about kind of how to do church, and so I was kind of grappling a bit with all of this, as well as the kind of being a late teenager. You kind of acknowledging that you might have been wrong for a few years.
Right.
I'm a bloke. I don't like to acknowledge I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And so I think there was all of that kind of stuff going on. So there was no great moment, but there was a very clear point, on kind of a Christmas Eve, where I actually remember praying in the middle of a very kind of, I was going to say boring, I should say that, but it was one of those midnight mass jobs. Most of the people were drunk. Those that weren't were kind of singing badly. But I just remember praying and saying, Lord, well, I think I've given my life to you, but I just absolutely do want to give my life to you. And it wasn't anything more than that, but it's what you then see what the Lord does, and kind of the challenges that come your way when you do give your life to Him. So.
I wonder what the incentive of your wife to be was as well. Like God used your wife to get you in the door, so to speak.
Yeah, which is interesting, and I would always be very clear with Christians. Please don't marry somebody who is not a Christian.
Right.
Just don't do that, because you're immediately putting yourself in a position where you shouldn't be. Seek the Lord for those who'll bring to you that a husband, a wife, but don't just don't do that. And she was quite right.
Are you still an apprentice electrician?
I started as a qualified electrician, doing kind of electrical stuff for a regional company, sort of travelling over the UK.
And how long did you do that for? So how do we get from Keith the electrician to Keith the pastor?
Well,
seems like quite a big step.
Well, I never really wanted to be an electrician. I never knew what I wanted to do. So there was a lot of unemployment when I was leaving school, and I just wrote something like 70, 80 letters saying, kind of, have you got a job going? I'm leaving school. So I ended up as an electrician. I was kind of okay at it, and I ended up supervising and managing a few others, but my heart wasn't really in it. I then thought, well, what do I do? I went and took a job as a salesman for a year or two. That wasn't really it. But at that time...
What were you selling?
Kind of electrical stuff, because I knew about electrical stuff.
Makes sense.
I don't want to go too far away from it. At the time we were worshipping, again, in an Anglican church, a very small... church. We married, had to move away. House prices were kind of high, so we moved out of the area. It was a very small Anglican church. An elderly vicar who was absolutely on fire for the Lord. Most of his congregation weren't, because he'd come in to kind of a traditional village church. But I knew that after a few months actually of being in that fellowship, I knew that the Lord was calling me to train for ministry.
Wow.
So I went through that started going through that process, but actually ran away from it within 6-9 months. It was kind of fear and not trusting the Lord. I'm married, got a mortgage, negative equity. In fact, we've got a mortgage for more than the house is worth. What do we do? Can't do this. Of course, the Lord can sort all of that out, but I didn't trust Him. So for getting on for 10 years, I ran away from this. And I just knew all the time the Lord was saying, well, you need to be doing this, you need to be doing this.
Right.
But in the meantime, in my kind of life, I took a job as an electrician at a Cambridge college, which, I thought, well, yeah, I can do that. I can trundle on and, I kind of work stuff out. But it turned out that the day after I arrived, that in the headlines of the local newspaper, this particular college was about to go bust. Now, that doesn't happen with Cambridge colleges very often. And it was in a bit of a state because of the buildings being so poor and maintenance being poor. And there needed to be something major happen, but they didn't have the resources. I'd worked out they were also managing things very badly and decided that it was a bit tricky. So I went and actually told the bloke in charge, look, you've got a few issues going on here. I'm new, you can tell me to go away if you like. And he said, well, I'm retiring. But the man that's coming in, I'm going to talk to him because I think he'll be interested to hear what you've got to say. I did kind of hang around, and actually he said, well, I've got to write the estate strategy. I don't know anything about estates. I'm a money man. I've come from the city. Before that, I was in the Navy, and he was a very, very intelligent character, great bloke. He said, I need some help. You could help me do it. Well, yeah, I'm an electrician. What do I know? But actually, we wrote an estate strategy. And I mean, the law was clearly in this because...
How did you find out about that? If you didn't know about it, I mean, these weren't the days of the internet, right?
They weren't, yeah.
YouTube, how to do an estate strategy,
Yeah, I mean, it was a case... I mean, I knew I had... Again, I'd obviously soaked up a lot more than I realised about buildings and the management and structures of, what do you do? And, buying and selling land, building buildings, setting up conference centres, that kind of stuff. So whilst this was occurring, I was also doing some additional training in business administration. But what I learned on the whole was from this very gracious bursar of the college who'd come in, and there was a problem that needed fixing. They didn't have any money, and so actually, they would never have used me, but they did. And as a result, I ended up managing majority of the staff in the college in those kind of support areas, setting up a business centre and conference centre, buying, selling land, developing land, selling houses. Would never have expected to be doing that. But that meant that, whilst all in the background, the Lord was saying, but you need to be doing this.
Yeah. How do you think that impacts somebody that, you've got a calling on your life and yet you're coming away from it? And you said interestingly, God was in that too. So God was still using this estates thing as well.
Well, I think the amazing thing about, how does the Lord work? I mean, it is incredible, isn't it? But when you find that you are saying no, now I'm glad that it wasn't a kind of Jonah issue. I wouldn't have wanted the big fish. But in a sense, you see in that story, you see how the Lord uses the situations, but he trains us along the way.
Right.
So he says, I want you to do this. Well, you're not going to... But I was learning, and I was learning an awful lot of stuff that was of value to ministry. I was managing a lot of people, so the disciplinary things, the grievance thing, just dealing with those. I actually spent a lot of time counselling people because they knew I was a Christian. They would come and talk to me. They wouldn't like to admit it. It'd usually be kind of late in the evening or whatever, they'd come and have a chat. So the Lord does do that. So I would say, if somebody, the first thing, if you know that the Lord is calling you, don't be arrogant. Do as the Lord asks. Because, yes, he'll bring you around and he'll use you. But why waste that calling that the Lord's got in your life? So, yes, he's incredibly gracious. I did give, again, kind of, there's a storyline, Rich is kind of underlining here, I gave in to the Lord again. But okay, I'll do the studying. By this time, I've got two children, and we've moved a few times. I'll do it, but life's too busy. I'll only do it if I can do it without actually going to college.
Right.
I thought, I've got the Lord on this one. Within a week or so, in fact, the pastor of my church handed me this. He said, well, you might be interested in this kind of study stuff. So I thought, well, okay, I can do that because it's just kind of low level. And it was a Knowing Your Bible course, which is actually very good, still running. King's Evangelical Divinity School, run it if you want to find it. It's worth it. Very kind of good stuff. But I did that, and the principal of the college phoned me after the first module. She said, "I think you're on the wrong course, aren't you?" At which point I just kind of laughed. So, well, okay, Lord, you've got me. And at that point, I did the real studying again. It was early on. It wasn't internet stuff, but CD-ROMs would come through the post, lectures, study trips to Israel, that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
it was good.
How did you balance, all the other stuff that had put you off for years? Because you said, because they do, like mortgage, kids, food on the table, all these ideas of providing for oneself over, seating yourself in the calling of God and letting Him provide for you. Like, how did you deal with that once you decided, I'm going to study to be, a pastor?
I think it is like anything, isn't it? When the Lord says, do this, and you say, well, I can't because, you make every kind of effort not to do it because you've got to put your own resources in there and deal with the problem, or not necessarily a problem, but just deal with living. But when you say to the Lord, okay, I'll do this, then the next door opens, and then the next door after that opens, and you can see a glimpse of the next door opening, and the Lord, there's no worry or fear. But if only we were not so stupid. Well, I say we. If only I'm not as stupid. Why do you not just trust the Lord and accept He'll give you one step at a time? That's the interesting thing with the Lord. What's going to happen next? So, and what happened next was I was expecting to go off and pastor a church somewhere, and I ended up planting a church. Well, I hadn't trained for that. I wasn't expecting that. But again, by this point, the Lord said, "Well, this is what I want you to do," and He made it absolutely clear. And I'm not a great one for kind of signs and wonders all over the place. But when the Lord says, "Plant a church," I mean, and
how did you hear that? People often say, like, God's told me, and because I'm interested in like how God speaks to me, and even describing it sometimes is difficult. I'm really interested to ask other people. So God said, but how? How did you hear God's voice? Yeah,
well, thanks for the difficult question.
You're welcome.
Well, the thing is, I'm always wary. When somebody comes and says, I've got a word for you, brother. The Lord said this to me, and I think, well, really?
Honestly, my next question is how? How?
So what did He say to you?
Yeah, exactly.
So and I'd actually taken a study day to kind of brush up on my Greek. I never did actually do it, by the way. I took the day to do it. So I sat down, sort of quiet time first, and the Lord led me to Deuteronomy at the point where it was a case of, you're about to enter the land. There are giants in the land, and the passage in Deuteronomy, and I read this, and immediately, we'd as a church, I was an elder in the church. We were part of it. It was a small church in Ely. And I was one of the elders. So we'd had a vision to plant the church at some time way in the future. It was kind of way down our list, alongside other things. But so it wasn't anything I thought I was going to be involved in. But it was just a clear thing. No, this is what and you need to do it. And you need to do it now. Well, how? So, and actually, we had an elders meeting that evening. So I'd actually spent the day reading this passage, praying, and how do you hear the Lord telling you that? Well, I can't tell you, but I can tell you when you read something like that and the Lord makes it real to you, and you think, well, yeah, but this is talking about the Hebrews going into the promised land, and you're telling me that this corresponds, your word for me at this point corresponds to this happening, and it clearly did. I mean, I was due to preach a couple of weeks later in church, and I had a ready-made sermon. I didn't. It's the easiest sermon prep I've ever had, and so it is one of those things that you kind of innately know. It's a witness of the Spirit, and if you've given your life to Christ, you have Him in your heart. So often we just have Him kind of sitting there and ignore Him.
So how did that go, planting a church?
Well,
Because no sane person decides they're going to plant a church. That's what I believe. That's how I know it's God.
I'm with you there. No same person decides to plant a church. And that's the other thing. If it's difficult and you can't do it,
Yeah.
and the Lord is saying to you to do it, actually it's a lot easier to do.
Yeah.
If it's quite a possibility and you've got the skill set, you might think, yeah, I could do this.
Yeah.
Then it's probably not necessarily right. Now, it may be, but...
Yeah.
Well, actually, I've read a few books on church planting and ignored all of the models. Not because I was being particularly arrogant, but took it to the other couple of elders, and they basically went, good idea, but how? And I preached a couple of weeks later, and I said, look, Joanna and I are going to be leaving in a year, and we're going to be planting a church, and we need people to help us. But the Lord is almost certainly saying to you, stay here and carry on with your ministry here. He might be saying to you, think about this. He might say to you immediately, you need to go. But I'm not going to call a team of people. I'm not going to ask anybody specifically. And I had a whole mixture of people, not very many. There were 15 of us, including children. But people I would never have chosen. Not because I didn't like them or they weren't great people, but would you choose an elderly lady in her 80s who's never had any experience of this kind of stuff, only ever lived within 5 miles of Ely? What kind of experience, what use, how could she work? But that is that kind of thing. I had an ex-alcoholic chap who was really struggling with his health. He was the first one, actually, who said, yeah, I've got to come. We had people with a whole mixture of skills. And so after a year of prayer and studying the area, which was just a small kind of housing estate in our area, and planning and training for people, we then went off.
And did you go and live in that community, or did you?
That's the other interesting thing. We'd been trying to move our about a year or two before to another part of the town, and it just had all gone completely wrong. But again, I decided it was right, and between us, Joanna and I decided this is the right thing, but it wasn't the right thing. But we kind of invested in it, so we kept going, and it went spectacularly wrong, and we ended up moving to somewhere else, which was right at one edge of the place that we would end up planting a church. And another couple, a family, were on the other edge, and they too felt called when it came to it. So bizarrely, we'd been put in place.
You'd like surrounded this place,
and there were those within the area. So it is. You've got to trust the Lord, and He does amazing things.
Yeah.
Try and plan it yourself; it can be a disaster.
Yeah, it sounds like quite a difficult time. If you had this thing that you don't really want to talk about that you were doing, and like the church planting. So how long? What was the church called, and does it still exist?
The church called New Connexions Free Church, and we were there for 13 years.
Wow.
And it did carry on for a couple of years. We left in the middle of the COVID situation, which wasn't great. So we left them without a pastor because I was actually appointed my present position the day before the lockdown, which meant that we'd committed to coming, and it was the right thing to do. But actually, sadly, the church has closed. It wasn't anything to do with the things we're talking about today. It was to do with the way that the government pretty much managed the COVID pandemic.
Right.
We're a church plant. We were using rented accommodation. Well, if you're using a school or if you're using a community building, you were locked out for nearly 2 years.
Yeah, wow.
And it caused, sadly, a lot of. The interesting thing is, a lot of really good stuff happened, and a lot of good stuff is still happening as a result of what went on. So it was certainly the right thing to do. It was a good work, and the Lord used it. I was horrified and shocked when I found that they were having to close, but I fully understood it was the right thing.
Yeah, but in a difficult time.
Yeah.
So when did you go to work at the primary school as a caretaker?
Okay, so it was about late 2016. I decided that it was time to go.
In the church at that point?
Yeah. So we'd been, in fact, had been for 8 years.
Right.
Yeah.
To trying to place in time.
Yeah,
so,
sorry.
Yeah.
We'd been, so I'd been attempting to work, in theory, part-time at the college. That was supposedly part-time, but of course, whilst it might have been part-time in the amount of days, the length of those days was pretty it wasn't part-time.
Right.
It just couldn't be. But
there's no such thing as a part-time job, just
No.
part-time pay.
Exactly, and in theory, as part-time pastor as well, but of course, that isn't. But the Lord, again, managed to enable that to work really well. I had people to visit in hospital. Well, the college was close to the hospital in Cambridge. I would just wander out. I had funerals to take. I had people to... And it would just... because he put me in a position where I could control my own time, and I had a great team of managers underneath me, I could do the things that I needed to do, except kind of the mental capability of making big decisions, leading big projects, and leading a church. The church always comes first. So when it came to a point, well, this needs to, we need to make a change here. The church were supporting me partially, but couldn't afford to pay me full time. So, much to the surprise of a lot of people, well, I can't become a school caretaker.
Well, you've done a state, so of course that was a
Well, yeah,
step for
I had a
you,
lot of people who would have done the kind of stuff that I'm going to do.
Yeah,
So I don't like getting my hands dirty.
Yeah,
That's fine.
good for you. Good for you.
So that's it was a case of I'll apply for the job. I did tell them that I would be overqualified, but if they would give me a chance, I could still pick up a screwdriver, as it were. They employed me on the understanding that they knew, I think the word was, we know you're a reverend, but we don't want any of that Christian stuff here. And my answer to that was, well, it's fine. I'm going to be me. As long as you allow me to be me, that's fine. I'm a pastor in the local area. So, if the people will know me in this area.
What did they mean? What did they mean by that?
This was it was an academy.
Did you ever ask?
And I think, I did. Well, I did ask afterwards.
Right.
What they meant was they didn't want the name of Jesus mentioned, because it might offend somebody.
Okay.
But I said, well, okay, if that's what you want, I'm just going to be me. But as an individual, and if I'm having a conversation with somebody, I'm going to be talking about whatever we're having in that conversation. I'm not going to be constrained. No, that's fine. But so I kind of arrived on that understanding. But within the first week, I was asked to take an assembly. Can you take an assembly in 2-3 weeks' time? Well, yeah. Well, don't mention Jesus. So I did take an assembly. I did mention Jesus, but they asked me to do another one.
Right.
I was asked to get involved in RE. I'd started in January, comes around to Lent. Well, what's this kind of shrove stuff? What do you mean to be shriven? And, well, we don't know anything about Christianity. So, the teachers would come and say, well, could you take this lesson? Could you take that lesson? Which is great, which I did. I'd have people coming along asking for advice, for prayer. Also, the school, it was a newish school, and they did have a problem with discipline. It was in a quite middle-class area, and they wouldn't have liked to admit they had a problem with discipline, and they were trying to do something about it, but they had got some quite badly behaved children. 8, 10-year-olds picking up bricks, throwing them in the classroom, and wrecking libraries, that kind of stuff. And I was the only chap in the school. So I did get involved in dealing with those. I set up a kind of gardening club and took these children to kind of get them to do practical things and value things. And that was all encouraged. Of course, it was encouraged. It was all free. I was a lot of it being done in my own time, as well as supposedly doing the other job. So, and that's fine. I'm very happy with that. The school were happy with it. But then comes a point when they became less happy with me.
Right. So this is what we're here to talk about today. Is we arrive at the point where 37 words changed your life. So you explain what you did to everybody at home, and how that impacted what seems like you were doing a lot extra. You were employed as a caretaker, it sounds like, and then because you are highly skilled and God is leaking out through you, you end up being a teacher, a chaplain, a sort of mentor for difficult, children. so like in good standing, I guess, with the school. Like they're really liking what you're doing, and you're happy and giving over and beyond.
Yeah.
And then you write a tweet. What did the tweet say,
Well,
Pastor Keith?
I should be able to remember this, but I'm going to read it.
Please do.
I'll give some background whilst I'm getting the tweet up on my phone. The background to the tweet is that as a church, we were wanting to reach out to the local community. We were reaching out to the local community. There were a couple of people in a home group one evening who said, well, look, how do we reach people who are gay? I'm not gay. I don't know how to do that. And we talked about how, it made no difference whether anybody was gay, straight, or whatever. Everybody needs Jesus, and it's all about the fact that we want to show his love. So how do we best do that? And my initial response was, well, look, the first thing we don't do is to go onto their own territory and become threatening or to become arrogant about the message we have, because it's not an arrogant message and it's not a threatening message. It's a message of love, and it's a message, yes, of judgment, but of course, we all need to know that. We don't do that. And one of the chaps said, well, what if I took my children along, just handed out a few tracts on the edge of it? And I remember saying, look, just don't take your children anywhere near it. I don't know if you've been to any Pride events. Some of them will be lovely, fluffy, kind of face painting bits. But I can tell you that it is a very sexualised kind of area that you can take your children into. Don't do it. So that was the background. So it comes to the end of May that year, and I was just thinking, well, I probably ought to remind people. I hadn't had a conversation for a week or two on this kind of stuff. So I put out a tweet which said this: a reminder that Christians should not support or attend LGBTQ Pride Month events held in June. They promote a culture and encourage activities that are contrary to the Christian faith and morals. They're especially harmful for children. So that was the tweet I put out. And it got quite interesting after that.
It doesn't seem like it's that much of a controversial statement as a Christian, but I can see why it might be controversial to the world slightly. What do you think?
I think you're right. I think it is controversial to the world. I don't think it should be, because the words were couched quite clearly in Christian terms to Christians. This is a reminder for Christians.
And also, you've made the context that you've just told me, just so that we're clear, is you were doing something in your other job which wasn't anti-LGBTQ plus, was actually, there's an issue in the UK. And if not globally, of like opposition between the church and that community in many ways, because I guess nobody likes to be called a sinner, do they? Right?
No.
But we're all sinners.
We are,
and we're not to judge people, right?
Yep.
But the church maybe hasn't done the greatest job at welcoming that community or not being judgmental, right? So we start from ground zero with questions, in house groups that aren't about someone's sexuality, but it's about how do we include them. So you're actually having an inclusivity conversation within that house group, and you sort of tell people not to go to Pride because it wouldn't be healthy, or why do you tell people not to go to Pride? Because it seems in opposition with that inclusivity conversation that you had. Yeah,
well, I mean, just for another kind of example, something which is not Pride but similar. And now this makes your eyes water to think about it. But in Cambridge, a couple of years before, there had been a naturist cycling event. Now, on a number of levels, I could see that that's not going to be great. But leaving my sense of humour aside, don't take your children to look at this stuff.
Yeah.
You've got naked bodies around. I mean, it's not right for children. So that's the concept. Why would you want to include your children in anything sexualised? And you could say, well, OK, leave the children at home, but we'll go to Pride and we'll be friendly. Well, that's fine. But how are you going to get the gospel message across in a way which is not going to seem threatening when people are in there celebrating something which is contrary to the gospel message? it is like a red rag to a bull. That seems to me an inappropriate thing. I could be wrong in that. Maybe there are ways of dealing with it. But from my perspective, Christians getting involved in that, it just seemed absolutely the wrong thing to be doing. I mean, just again, a bit more context. We had a baptism a few months before when a transgender friend of somebody had come along to church. Now, I would have expected maybe that not to go particularly well, not because most of us would know, but it might be one or two who would just not know how to deal with it. This person was welcomed and loved and encouraged and spoken to like anybody else.
Fantastic.
And that's how it should be. Are we going to preach the whole gospel, tell everybody about Jesus? Yes, we are. But somebody is in no more or less need of Jesus than I am, and you are, and everybody else. And if we know that, then we need to be reaching out to everybody, seeing past that, but not accepting it as this is okay, because it isn't. Wouldn't accept any other sin as okay. If I go and rob a bank, that's not okay. If I consistently go against what God has said, whatever it is, it's there's a need for us to know Jesus. So homosexual, heterosexual, God doesn't have terms like that.
Well, we all have to pick up our cross, I guess, and I don't feel like I disagree that your feelings are wrong, but they still, your actions then might be sinful.
Yeah.
And what we do is conflate both. So what we do is we say sin is the opposite of good, rather than sin is the opposite of God. And so what we get into with a conversation with the world, that, if there's anyone like not a Christian listening, this is how I would try and explain it, would be, I'm not saying that you're a bad person for being who you are. I'm just saying, just like my sin, it takes you away from God. And if there's one thing I'm sure, if you go to Pride or, other events that are based, in unbiblical values, they'll be a long way from God. You won't find people worshipping, celebrating, praying, and seeing the fruits of Jesus at those places. And that's the framing that I sin within, so that people know it's not the opposite of good or the opposite of wrong. It's not right and wrong or good and bad. It's actually God and sin.
Yeah.
And then when we put it in that context, because if you don't care about God or you don't believe in God, why would it matter that you're sinning? Like, you just don't believe in it, so it shouldn't be that offensive. But everybody has this innate knowing when you say you're a sinner, it's like you get this anger of when you first met Christ, you're like, oh, but I'm quite happy cursing my way around the church or whatever, and you have to take a look at yourself and the life you're living. It then doesn't mean you change overnight or all the way you're living your life becomes easy, but you do need Jesus, and I really stand with you in that. So you make this tweet. What happens next?
Well, pretty much immediately. And this is a Saturday evening, so I'm not actually a great social media character. I'm on Twitter, and I think it probably says on my kind of strapline on Twitter, it's really just to encourage Christians to be salt and light. So that's the reason. It seemed a good plan, mainly because I think Twitter is is one of those modern day marketplaces. We need to be in the public square. I'm sure that if Paul, Peter, John, they'd be in the public square, they'll be there telling it as it is. For the love of Jesus, that's why they'd be telling it as it is. So I'm not a great Twitter person, so I wrote this tweet, put the phone down, was about to turn the phone off before going to bed, and Twitter was kind of mad. I'd never had so much reaction, but mainly because the local newspaper editor, who I've no idea was both gay and a great fan of Pride, was gay and was a great fan of Pride. But he had a friend who was a lady married to another lady who was the local Liberal Democrat councillor. In fact, I think they were both councillors. And they were having this conversation via Twitter about how awful and dreadful and hideous all of this is, and how homophobic and all the rest. Now, this started on Twitter, but it moved to Facebook, which I know nothing about because I'm not on it. But it then kind of grew and grew. The next morning, it was Sunday, about ready to go off to church, and I had another newspaper editor give me a call and say, can we talk? Joanna took the call and said, no, we can't, we're off to church. This journalist then turned up at church before, as we were preparing. I wouldn't give them an interview, but I did give them just a few clear points. What we're saying is not anything that is particularly hateful. In fact, it is aimed at Christians. That's pretty much all I said. But then, the newspapers, certainly regionally, started to pick this up, and Facebook appears to have been the biggest issue with.
And what was the framing of it? What were people saying about what you said?
Well, it was a case of this so-called Christian is hateful. He hates the LGBT community. Now, I know, as did people then, and have done for a while, there isn't actually an LGBT community. They're at war amongst themselves. So that, in itself, that was an issue. But there was that. And then somebody said, I understand he's also working at a school. He shouldn't be anywhere near children. He's a risk. And so it kind of snowballed from there. So I turn up at the school an hour or two later when everybody else turns up. I'm told by the head teacher that you've really been causing chaos for the school over the weekend, which I think I kind of shrugged off really and said, well,
did you ask how?
So exactly, how have I caused you chaos? Oh, well, I've got so many emails, complaining about, the things that you're saying and your hateful attitude. And so, okay, well, I'll let you deal with those. And I just went off and carried on with the rest of the day because that's how it is. But a few hours later, I had a letter telling me that I was to be disciplined for bringing the school into disrepute because the trust that ran the school were mortified that anybody dare upset somebody.
How did you feel at the time? Because you talk about it with a calmness now, but I mean, I don't think I'd have been so calm at the time.
I think I was disappointed in the school because of the relationships that actually were very good, and the fact that they clearly knew me. And I think it seemed to me that the school itself were not driving this. It was the trust that were driving it. So I kind of just accepted it. I felt slightly sorry for the head teacher, actually. Except, I did tell her that this wouldn't end well either for the school or me if they wanted to, because I don't let these things go, because it's important that we are able to say things, particularly when you think about protecting children. My two aims there were we must show the love of Jesus, and we must make sure children are protected from sexualisation. And you'd expect the school may not like the first one, but they should love the second. We should definitely be safeguarding children. So I was disappointed. I wasn't angry particularly. I suppose I just thought, well, this is maybe it'll eventually blow over. People will find something else to moan about next week.
I mean, I've got a lot of friends that are part of that community, and the strange thing about Pride for me is that I wouldn't ever place my identity in my sexuality, and most people that I've met don't. So if I meet you, you say I'm a Christian, or you say I'm an electrician, or you either say what you do or something that you're really passionate about. I'm an artist, or and we place part of our identity in who we perceive ourselves to be. So for a whole community to be based on the identity of like sexuality seems very, very strange, but that's okay. And I don't think that people in that community do either, because when I meet with my friends, they say I'm an artist, I'm an electrician, I'm
absolutely
an entrepreneur, whatever they say, I'm a Christian, etc. And yet that's what that event is celebrating is sexuality. So of course you wouldn't want children there. I've been to Pride events, and they are overly sexualized activities there. Not all of it, some of it's nice and celebratory. And I always felt because my friends were in that community, and this was BC before Christ. They were fun events, but there was lots of alcohol, lots of illegal narcotics and drugs and things there, and lots of inappropriate dressing and kissing and stuff like that. That not because it's between people of the same sex, but because you shouldn't. I wouldn't do some of those things on the street.
Yes.
They're for behind closed doors and for within the basis of a marriage. So I think they are a difficult thing for children. So what did the school do next?
Well, just taking up on that point about the events and how do people identify it. I think the interesting thing is not the LGBT community, if you can call it that. Clearly, there are those who are radical within that, but actually, the problem I had wasn't. I mean, most of the people who were causing me a problem weren't necessarily gay.
No.
In fact, they almost certainly weren't.
Yeah.
It was a case of we must stand up. We're all woke, so let's stand up for anybody who's being attacked. Well, right. The two issues I had were, one, I wasn't attacking anybody. It wasn't even attacking the event. But also, why do you just stand up for anything without actually having a little look to see what's behind it, what's going on? So you asked me about the school.
Yeah, so
what happened next?
It's interesting because you get driven, just as a response to that, because you almost get driven into, I think, the conversation I'm trying to measure is that challenge between, how I perceive that community to perceive themselves.
Yes.
But actually what we're saying is we don't think they do or we do. It's just a small fraction, but it's the way that's then interpreted on society to be inclusive.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean what it says on the tin anymore, because it's inclusive apart from your point of view.
Yeah. Everything is inclusive so long as you say what those who have decided what is inclusive say.
Right.
You cannot be saying anything which doesn't fit the mould.
Right.
And so I think that is the issue. And if you want to tell people about the love of Jesus, well, the school were clearly frightened of me mentioning Jesus. They mentioned that quite early on. So there's something sad, really, about that. But wanting to protect children from sexualisation, well, I was a bit surprised by some of that. So there was a disciplinary issue, and I went to a disciplinary meeting, at which I was kind of asked all sorts of weird stuff. Now, I've carried out a number of disciplinary meetings in when I had a real job.
Yeah. So I guess you weren't that phased. You were like, I know what's going to happen.
Okay, well, we've got to go through the
process.
process. I'll go through the process and I'll say my thing. But actually, the process was not terribly well run. It was run by somebody who had just been appointed as the deputy head teacher. This young lady was a lovely young lady. She had no experience. So she was being kind of fed by HR people in the background, as it were. But I was asked all sorts of stuff about the church website, the contents of my sermons, and I'd got a Christian Concern. They're a dodgy organisation. No, they're not. They're a great organisation, but I was told they were a dodgy organisation by the school because I'd retweeted. This was on a church Twitter page, which was different to mine. Something about mermaids, which was on the Christian Concern website. And so I was told, you do this as well. You hate these people as well. Well, this is an investigation, surely. Aren't you supposed to be asking me questions, not telling me? So I'm being me, I did say that. I think we probably need to just get the reality of this is you want to know the facts. Let's stick to the facts, shall we? But they were kind of doing a kind of great sweep of anything they could to try and tell me that I just hated anybody who was not heterosexual, and in fact, pretty much, a white male heterosexuals. I had a problem with anybody else. Well, I was in a school full of women teachers, and clearly we'd have got on okay. So I don't think there's any of that going on either. But it was almost anything you could to just prove there was a problem. But I then asked, actually, at the end of that, having been such a kind of strange, well, do you actually understand what the gospel is? Do you understand what a Christian would believe? And do you understand what the role of a pastor is? And the answer was no. I know. I know what the gospel is. I think. So, well, let me tell you. So I just gave a quick gospel message, and I thought, well, this is slightly odd, but left it at that. But I'd been then told to stay away from the children. I'd been told to stay away from the school gates, to avoid the parents. Well, I couldn't actually carry on doing what I was doing. So I said, well, look, I can't do this. I'm going to have to not be in the school if that's the case. No, you can do your job, but just, well, no, I can't because it doesn't work. So I kind of stepped back at that point. I actually, we had all sorts of other stuff going on. Prior to all of this tweet, we'd already realised it was time for us to move from our existing church. The Lord was moving us on. Where should we be going? What should we? And so there was all of that kind of stuff going on. My youngest daughter was quite unwell, still quite unwell. So we've got lots of those things going on, which meant actually I don't need the hassle here. I'm going to see the process through, but I'm actually going to resign, not because I think I've done anything wrong. That's why I'm going to see the process through. In parallel to this, I'd had somebody from Christian Concern actually called me and said, look, I think you might need our help. And I said, don't be silly. That's a silly thing. Well, why would I need your help? It's all fine. And no, I think you might need our help. So a couple of days later, I said, yeah, actually, I probably do need your help. Just not because I particularly wanted to fight a case or anything, but I wanted to make a very clear point. There are so many issues around this, not only the protection of children, but if you're a Christian in a school, are you not allowed to have any ability to share your faith because you work in a school? Not just within the school, I accept that. You shouldn't be preaching on every corridor corner. You shouldn't be indoctrinating anybody in that sense. But outside of the school, particularly when you're taken on as a pastor, that did seem quite concerning. I was told, well, you can do this as long as your other job doesn't affect us. Well, that was something different. It comes back to you've got absolute freedom of speech as long as you say what we're happy with. But we're not going to tell you what we're happy with until you've said it.
What happened? Did you leave or did they fire you? Like what?
Well, I left and I wrote a letter of resignation saying that I could see the way the process is going. It's going to end up either with me given a final written warning or dismissed. If you give me a final written warning, it will be because I've said what I've said outside of the school, and the answer will be, well, if I do that again, I'll be fired. So either way, I'm going to be going, aren't I?
Yeah.
So it actually, after the long process, and it went over a long time.
How many meetings did you have?
Only 3 or 4 meetings, but actually they took a long time between them because they seemed not to be clear about how they wanted to proceed. They could see there was a problem. They didn't really want it to go any further, and they knew that it would go to court because I had said, look, if we don't get things resolved here because of the nature of the problem, it involves freedom of expression.
Yeah.
It involves free speech, but it also involves the safety of children, and that does give me concern. So I would take it further. So they knew that. But in the end, I was given a final written warning and told that in the letter that came with it that I had definitely brought the school in disrepute. I'd spoken very badly of a well-loved community. Well, neither of those things were true.
Yeah, and you hadn't even spoken about the school in your tweet. It had nothing to do with the school, surely.
It didn't have anything to do with the school. I didn't reference the school, and I would never have referenced the school in anything.
So did you take it further?
Well, we then took it to a tribunal, and we won on the case of indirect discrimination. We'd gone after unfair dismissal and direct discrimination. Unfair dismissal was very unlikely to be won because I had resigned.
Right.
However, it did give the ability to make the point. I mean, why had I resigned? Well, I could have gone on for another few months of not being able to do my job, a lot of uncertainty, knowing what the outcome would be, because they'd made it absolutely clear all the way through the process.
And you would have tripped up again based on those rules because you're a pastor,
tripped up within a week.
Yeah, because you can't unbelieve what you believe, right? So someone's asked your opinion, you share it, all of a sudden you're gone.
I mean, if I quote, I mean, I did ask them if I could read some scripture to them, and they said, well, why?
Right.
Well, because if I put some verses from Romans chapter 1 on Twitter, you will find that more offensive than what I said.
Right.
Well, why would we? It's the Bible. So I read them Romans chapter 1. And I did ask, well, would you be happy for me to tweet? Well, that would be your decision. Well, yes, it would. But what would happen if I did? Well, we can't really say. No, but it would only matter if the mob came and contacted the school. The school wouldn't do anything, but the mob would be mobilised. They were mobilised. They were watching my kind of every move. So, yeah, we had that. And then alongside that, of course, there were death threats, there were people trying to sell the home, all sorts of weird stuff going on. Now, much of this I didn't actually see because it was on Facebook.
Right.
Some I did see, including somebody trying to kind of run me off the road when I was cycling. I don't know whether that was the aim, but it was certainly the outcome. It was a kind of, I did stop.
That's terrifying.
But it was just odd, really. I mean, I'm relatively pragmatic about things. Well, just take it as it comes. But of course, your family are there behind you. That's the issue, which is one of the reasons I resigned to try and ensure that I was actually around more to make sure that our family was safe. Because we did have funeral directors turning up at the home to arrange my funeral. So
you did.
Oh yeah.
So how do you think that happened? Like who was doing that?
I guess I don't actually know. But it will be people who didn't. I mean, we were quite well known in the area, and I had a lot of people who would come up to me in the street and say, "Look, I don't want anybody to see me talking to you, but I think what you're doing is right. Keep doing it." Well, I can, but I need some support.
Right.
Well, no, but they might come after me next. And honestly, that was the issue. So there was a kind of fear. There were a lot of churches in Ely. I didn't actually have any support from any other church in Ely. Lots of other churches around the area and nationally. I had vicars, ministers, pastors, whatever you will, contact me and individuals. But the churches in Ely were fearful because they'd seen what had happened and they were absolutely not going to upset anybody. That kind of comes to the crux of it, really. We shouldn't be out there to upset anybody, but we must share the gospel. People need Jesus.
But the gospel is going to likely upset people. So, I mean, that sounds quite a frightening time. How did you as a family deal with it? I mean, what did your wife think, and what did your friends think? And
yeah, I mean, as a church, probably I'll start with the church because the church were absolutely fully behind what I'd said. They knew what was what. They knew who we are. And so I think the church family were obviously very hurt by this and upset and offended. But my wife and girls, oldest daughter was already, she's an academic, so she was living in Oxford at the time. Youngest daughter was back home with us because she'd been unwell. And they were obviously concerned for me. They were concerned for the situation and concerned for my safety, I guess.
Yeah.
Personally, it's just another day, really.
Did you get the police involved?
Well, no, because I'd already seen plenty of the stuff that the police are putting out about how wonderful Pride is, how wonderful Twitter, on Twitter, and you think, well, actually, this is difficult. The police did contact me around about 6 months later to say, well, you've caused quite a lot of disharmony within the community. We'd like you to come to a meeting with the local council to learn how to harmonise. I politely declined. I didn't really see that would be very helpful.
Oh wow! I think I'd have had to turn up and see what was going on.
Well, I was tempted, but of course that's the other issue. We were a church who were meeting in a council building.
Right. Well, yeah.
We'd already been threatened by a local councillor that they would kick us out. Now, I don't doubt that had that have happened, we'd have won the ability to get back. But you don't want you need somewhere to meet.
Yeah.
And so there's all of that going on as well. And also, I don't want to be aggressively assertive about things. I'll be assertive, but I don't want to I don't want to be an aggressor.
Yeah.
But we must stand up, and this is the thing which has really drawn me to a big conclusion very early on. Well, there are two, but the first one is this: pastors, ministers across the country are still, even today, only paying lip service to a lot of the things that we might preach. We're not actually practicing what we preach. Now, I'm not saying we should be reckless. We really shouldn't. But we must be willing to stand up and not just support people who've got in trouble, but be those who are willing to say the things that those people were saying and got into trouble for, because it's scriptural. We're in a fight, and we need to be wise, we need to be compassionate, it all needs to come from the Lord. We mustn't choose to do anything, but it just shows me that there is such fear. We shouldn't be afraid of the world. We have a mighty God, and He's King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and we've got to be bold, we've got to be brave, we've got to put ourselves on the line. Again, say, don't be reckless, but we've got to be putting ourselves on the line because people need to know about Jesus. We want to share His love. Yes, it comes with a cost.
And so, how's that impacted you now? So you sort of, had to leave your job. Like you had this other stuff going on. Like, what does Pastor Keith do next? He's been disgraced in his community. He's been cancelled. How did that actually affect your ability to, earn a living and do life?
We just carried on as a church. We, if anything, we grew. We certainly grew spiritually. We didn't have any animosity from anybody. We had a lot of support from Christians around about, and actually the public, who were very, very happy to. And we just carried on doing the kind of outreach that we'd have done. We would always be reaching out to the local community. So we just carried on until, of course, it was time for us to move. So that process was already in track. We knew that it was time to move on. It did make it interesting when I applied. In fact, the present place, I'm in South London now. And I applied for the role, and I'd have phoned the chap who was taking the applications, and I said, you do need to know about me before you interview me, because they'd invited me to you realise. He said, look, that's why you're being interviewed. We knew about that. We've checked you out, which was interesting, because this churches are naturally conservative. Evangelical churches are quite conservative. And the idea of, but what if it happens here? Well, it might, because I'm not going to say anything any different. But that's not my aim. My aim is to reach out to the community where the Lord sends me, and to build up the church so they can reach out to the community, because we need to get the gospel message out there.
Yeah, well, and Pastor Keith, you don't strike me as a controversial character. I don't feel like you're an activist. You're on the front line. Banner waving, standing on street corners, passing out flyers, and certainly not anti-LGBTQI+. Actually for that community, you just want to share Jesus with them.
Yeah.
And had maybe said to your congregation, don't go to Pride and wind them all up. Don't be that person is actually what you'd sounded like you'd advocated. And yet, you share with your community and your thoughts on that, and you end up in this really strange situation. What did the court say in the end? What did they say against the school? And
well, the school. the court kind of it was almost appeared to me to be kind of grudgingly. They could see that I've been indiscriminately.
The court were.
Yeah. I mean, maybe I'm reading something into that, but it seemed to be quite grudging. They didn't like what I'd said, but they could see that I probably ought to have the right to say it.
Right.
Being kind of nice liberals, that would be the thing to say.
Yeah.
And it is quite a good thing to say, isn't it? We should have the right to say things. But the school, they won on the other counts. But the court, interestingly, when we're actually in court, the judge, the legal team, the other side, the panel didn't understand what Christianity is. Actually, we had to point out what Christianity is and what a pastor would believe, what a Christian would believe in the workplace. And that's the second thing. I mentioned two things that really struck me. One was that church ministers need to really get a grip of this and come together and work with organisations like Christian Concern and others, not just to support, but to engage to get the gospel message out.
Yeah.
But the other thing was this illiteracy of when it comes to Christianity. Now, in the school, I'd worked out that the teachers didn't understand what a Christian would be believing. I knew that. I knew that the deputy head didn't believe that. I knew that the head didn't know that. I knew that the head teacher didn't know that. I found out that the governors of the school didn't know that and that the trust didn't know that. And these are people of all sorts of ages. I thought, for some bizarre reason, that when it came to court, that at least the judge would understand on paper what a Christian would believe. But no. So it almost kind of emphasises that we have such a job to do to get the gospel message out there. And it is a message of love, I'm not an activist, I'm quite a boring character, but, when it comes to Jesus, we all have to be activists. And we have to be activists within the character that the Lord has given us.
It points towards a post-Christendom society, which, can be deflated in one sense. Because I'm like, there must have been one Christian in that process somewhere, that knew. But equally, it's a great opportunity, isn't it?
It is.
The fact that, there's a whole multi-generational society that hasn't heard the gospel message is actually a great opportunity to, go into the world and share the good news of Jesus again.
Yeah.
So what's next, Pastor? What's
just
next?
trundling on, really.
What does that look like?
Trundling on is just taking what the Lord gives you each day, isn't it, and moving with it. Looking to, it's church ministry for me, really. We're settled. We're in South London. We're reaching out to that community around. It's a small church. It's a church that has had its issues in the past and is slowly growing. And it's a church that is a loving Christian family, and building up that family so that there is that desire more and more to go out and share, whether it's within the family, home, neighbours, whether it is comes from Christmas. Next week we'll be handing a few leaflets out to invite people to Christmas service. We'll be delivering leaflets, and nativities, and all the kind of stuff. And there's a lot. Church ministry in itself is big enough to do. But also alongside that, I really, if given the opportunity, I would do anything and go anywhere if the Lord leads me to really encourage other Christians to just live the faith. Have a read of Peter's second letter, particularly the end of it, and he talks about all this kind of negativity. Is the Lord coming? Or it seems like it's going to be a long time, and everybody's going to be out to get you. But it's not a negative message. It's not a negative message to the church. It's not a negative message for the world. It's a positive message saying, "Oh, look, this is going to happen. Just be aware." But it doesn't matter, because the Lord is the Lord. He doesn't have anything happen that surprises him. Today, here and now, he knows exactly what we're doing, and he knows what he's leading us into. So a post-Christian society, well, maybe we have been for a while. But is he surprised? No. Is he going to use us? Well, if we're willing.
It's good. It's a really good encouraging message, Pastor. I wondered if you might take a moment to maybe just pray for people at home that, are in the same situation. So maybe they're facing, they're in a situation where they want to say something, but they can't because they fear for the sort of cancel culture of, losing their job.
Yeah.
Or people that are going through it and they're in the middle of a court case. And indeed those, that are where you are as well. And maybe you could just pray straight to the people at home.
Absolutely.
And we could just finish it, in prayer for all the people that are in the same situation that might need some encouragement today.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Pastor.
Let's pray. Lord God, we just love you. We thank you. We're amazed at your joy. It's your joy that you pour into our hearts, even in the times of difficulty. And Lord, I would just want to lift up any who are struggling, any who have that situation going on in their lives, which is maybe just starting, just finishing, is in the middle of what seems such a shock, such a surprise, because they've said something positive about your love. They've said something encouraging that has really just caused chaos. Lord, there are such a need, and we thank you that you know every heart. There is not an individual in this world who you don't know and love. And Lord, for your people, you call us to be bold in your strength, to be courageous with your strength, to know your compassion, know your wisdom. So Lord, would you lift us up? Would you hold us up? Would you take up our needs and meet them? And Lord, I do pray that by the power of your Holy Spirit, you would pour your love and your peace into the hearts of those who are really going through it now. We ask it in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Pastor. I appreciate your prayer. I want to thank you and honour you for coming today. We pray for your family and for your future. I want to encourage you to keep doing what you're doing and to keep sharing the love of Jesus. And there are a few people here that I want to thank that it wouldn't be possible without. So we'd like to thank Christian Concern. Without Christian Concern, you wouldn't have got the support you needed.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we wouldn't be having this interview today. So they're a great organisation. And if anybody at home, if you are struggling with the issues that we've talked about today, please do get in touch. We'll put some details in the comments section so that you can get in touch. It's not that God TV particularly will be able to help you, but we will be able to point you in the right direction. And certainly if you want to call, you can do that too. There are people around the world waiting to take your call who will happily pray for you. It's a free service, but also they can put you in touch with other Christian organisations that will deal with your specific situation, Christian Concern being one of them. I also want to say thank you to the technical team. I always do this because they're behind the scenes. They never get mentioned in any podcast I ever see, but actually without them, it wouldn't be possible. So, thank you to David, Lloyd, and Noah today. And finally, thank you to all of you for watching at home, because it's because of your comments, your likes, your shares that we're encouraged and we carry on. So we're a community and a family here at God TV. So if you could do all the things that you're supposed to do on YouTube and Facebook and share and like and comment and engage in the public discourse around the issues that we've talked about today, we would appreciate that. Even if you disagree, we would just love to hear your thoughts and let us know what is going on in you and through you and what Jesus is doing in your life, because we'd love to hear your testimony and we'd love to be encouraged by you too. So from myself, Pastor Keith, and all the God TV family, we say goodbye, God bless, and we'll see you next time on God TV Together, the podcast.